Yeah, it's an interesting one because we spoke the other day about trying to find ways of, let's say, still being professional with junior players, but almost lightening the mood of training and the intensity and the expectation and stuff like that. So, can you remember any? Did you voice that opinion to anyone when you were that age, or was this all hindsight's reflection?
Uh, that's a good question. No, I probably didn't voice it.
Yeah,
I don't think I'd have been necessarily courageous enough for that.
yeah,
But I'm sure all of the experienced coaches taking me away on the trips were well aware of it and were doing their best. And at times, would have been doing a good job. I remember, there's still moments in there where I found my tennis and played some good stuff.
yeah.
Um, and the trips were enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that the competition part.
Yeah.
And I think then just feeling like a little bit behind the eight ball, and
Yeah.
because of the contrast, and it's a difficult position for those coaches, selectors, people deciding on the systems. Is I'm coming back and winning the Grand Prix or whatever you call it, the weekend events with the best players in the country, and doing fine with the year above as well. And then it's like, well, where do you go? What level of competition is there?
Yeah, it's a tough one because that you alluded to it earlier. I kind of have this just a theory that the difference between, let's say, last 16 and semi-finalist is huge in mentality. So if you, like you say Andy and Jamie were cleaning up across those junior events under 14 across Europe, and if you think of I'll use the word swag. I'm 47 years old and I'm using that word, but they do have a bit of swag about them, that the players that are consistently semi-finalists and finalists, if you then take that at every level, I think it's the same. So if
Right.
you take at the top pro guys that, you've been around them a lot more than me, and it would be the same, let's say, the futures level. If you're regularly semi-final and beyond there, and then the challenger level, then the tour level, and so there's just a different aura about them. And I've met quite a few players that have been, let's say, around that 60 to 100 ATP or WTA, and they think they're relatively rubbish.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because they are 60 in the world, and they
where you are. Yeah.
Exactly. Therefore, they know that realistically, that is, they're doing well, maybe in the odd 250 or whatever, and they're not getting to the latter part. So I think that's the point really, is that I think as coaches, we have to be mindful of that and try and take that out of the equation, especially for juniors. It's like literally focus on your game at the time, where it could go. And so that was why I was interested if the coaches had been involved in any of that. Or
Yeah, I think looking back, I'd have been more selective, or I'd have liked those around me to be a bit more selective with which events you're going to and what your level is, because of just that. It can be, it can leave a bit of scar tissue there if you're just going to the next top event and losing.
Yeah.
And then similarly, that's across the board, and all those events. And like you're saying, men and women that are 70 in the world can have losing records for the year. They could have only won 20 matches and lost 25. That's not it's not an enjoyable, thriving feeling for a tennis player, regardless of the level.
Exactly. And then I had a conversation with a parent a few weeks back who had I suggested that as a task for their kid. Which was when all this stuff started. I suppose we should say we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic, in case anyone's watching this next year. But I'd suggested, why don't you get them to do some research on a player ranked between maybe 65 and 100, win-loss percentages, look back at their schedule and imagine being them, traveling to South America and losing first round, traveling to the Far East and losing second round, that whole thing. And it worked in some sense because the kid was being particularly hard about not winning all the time. And but it had a I would say a detrimental effect, because the parent then said, it's fine, you can win as much as you can lose. And I was like, no, that's not what I was wanting to come out of it. It was, focus on developing your game, don't focus on win-loss and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting that the next stage of your journey, if you like, was that going into like a national academy, like 14?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then from the progression of that, I guess that was happening during some of these abroad trips. But from 13, I started at one of the then national academies. So at that time, they had just introduced 4 of them around the country, in Gosling, Bath, Loughborough, and Leeds, I believe. And I was at the one in Gosling. So yeah, started there, and that was the first time I'd say I really shifted into a properly kind of professional junior program, having been doing it before, but with jumping out of school from regular school, we didn't really have the relationship. This was where the school was selected, had the relationship with the academy, and absolutely loved that environment. That was brilliant. It suited me down to the ground. It was essentially school in the morning, and then 1:30 in the afternoon you're off over to Gosling, 2 till 4 tennis, 5 till 7 tennis and fitness combination, back over. And I was boarding at that school, get the social side too. It was just full days and a really cool time in the training environment with those things going on, traveling abroad and trying to get better at handling that.
Yeah. And what was the age range of the players that you were training with? So you were 13. What did it go up to?
Yeah, so I think because it was the first year that they'd started, and to do, with areas of players and location towards those academies, mine was actually just 6 of us, 3 girls, 3 guys, and they were 88s and 89. So I'm born 88, so my year and the year below. So I was one of the older ones, and it was a real small group. 2 coaches, James Lenton, Dave Ison, actually Carl Mice a little bit at the beginning as well. I think he was in a consultancy role. Sarah Hilton on the fitness side. So we had great, level of support and staff, and it was fun. I guess that's fortunate, but the guys were so good. The guys and girls I got on with great. So it was just, it never felt like, some of the challenges that might occur for players and groups of that age are just great fun and cracking up with the small group.
Yeah. And do you think, just based on what we've talked about so far, do you think it helped with you being, let's say, metaphorically, one of the older players at that time, when you were maybe suggesting it, a little bit scar tissue and so on?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, well, then, maybe interestingly now with the knowledge I have and experience I have, is you're looking back at it and you might be looking at the sort of on the performer side is that competitor versus the trainer. And I was always a good practicer and good trainer, good at improving my game, and in later years prided myself on that, but definitely had the actual performance part, the match playing side, where we spent more of my time in later years, probably unpicking some of those habits that were occurring then. So never, always kind of thrived in that training environment, and in those years, and then a couple of years after, joined Alan Jones and trained with him and his academy, because followed James Lenton moved, who was coaching me at the National Academy, moved over back with Alan. I kind of followed him, and that really hammered home some of the training lessons I learned and my ability to work hard and apply myself. So it was always the bedrock of me as a player. And then it was trying to continually add the bits on the match court.
It's you've worked with some fantastic coaches, so this is in absolutely no way a slight on them at all, but I do feel there's an opportunity for the same amount of, let's say, work ethic or application to be applied at the tournaments, but in a different sense, in just the work ethic, but the experiences of learning how to compete when you're at tournaments versus, you see a lot of people that there's so many juniors that say the same thing. It's like, I practice better than I compete. And they say, well, you need to therefore practice competing. Kind of almost what we talked about in terms of learning how to have a work ethic, or learning how to be a kind of professional. but also learning how to be a professional competitor. I think that there's perhaps a bit too much labeling that goes on, where it's like they're just a natural match player and they don't train so hard, or they're just train really hard and they don't compete so well. I think we need to address that balance.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, yeah, the time and effort around the young people, those ages, kind of those formative years, I guess, of playing with some of those ideas and having that playful approach to it as well. Like we I know yourself and I talked about recently, is just it being fun and engaging with some of those emotionally challenging things in competition. But also inherently difficult about that is you get a lot of time and opportunity to work with those coaches in the training environment, and not that many in the match environment.
Yeah, well, that's always the thing I used to say to coaches, that when we were, I would use the horrible expression back in the day, but when we were in the thick of traveling around various different parts of the world with juniors, we prided ourselves on making sure that we were doing a good body of work at the tournaments, because we perhaps in Scotland didn't have the luxury of having big programs with lots of hours, lots of courts. And therefore, when we went to the tournament, it was almost like, right now, God, we've got the kids 14 hours a day for 7 days in a row. It was an unbelievable opportunity. So I think the irony of our situation was that we probably did more on the match play side because we had the time with the players.
Yeah, that's where your time was.
Yeah. And again, that's just the hindsight now. But when you're doing it, you don't realize. But all the stuff on charting and filming and reviewing and video analysis, when I think back to some of the video analysis we did back in the day, it was on something called Silicon Coach, and it cost about 1,200 quid. And now you can get that for free on an app. It's crazy what we are having to pay for. But I do think, the more I think about these things, I do believe there's a lot more learning could be done on the road, rather than actually, like you say, it would take the heat off someone who is feeling, I'm a bit out of my depth. This is just a learning experience, mate. Let's just have fun. We're away. Your mates are all in school.
Yeah, exactly.
You're in Barcelona, you're whatever. It's just such an opportunity to learn. And there's such a long journey that why put the pressure on a 13-year-old when, it could be another 10 years before you technically become a career professional, so
right.
Yeah,
exactly. And it's I think that's all spot on. And it's largely as well as the feedback the coaches were getting were coming from me. It would be like you put in a good block of work for a couple of weeks on a specific thing, go away to the event, play, compete, come back. And at that age, I would say I was reasonably good at giving an overall review of what went on. But there's no way it can be that accurate. Like seeing it with your own eyes and being there is important.
It's something that irks me at the moment is that, and I understand why it's done, but the lack of video that we can get from tournaments now because of safeguarding and so on. So 100% that has to be in place. But if you're talking about filming the entire court for tactical analysis, you can't, it's becoming harder and harder to do that. So therefore we're relying on either the players' feedback, and like you say, teenagers are typically quite difficult to get grey feedback. It's always black and white. Or the parents. So we maybe have to train the parents how to be analyzers, but then they have to disconnect the emotion. Or we have to try and get coaches to travel more with players, which maybe we can speak about a little bit later on.